The fear did not arrive as a thunderclap, but as a seepage. For Arthur Pynchon, a man whose life was built on the sturdy foundations of logic and measurement, its insidious nature was the most humiliating part. He was a senior architectural draftsman, a man who spent his days rendering the world in precise, clean lines. His universe was one of right angles, calculated load-bearing points, and the confident sweep of a pencil that knew exactly where a wall should stand. Darkness, in his professional opinion, was merely the absence of light, a negative space to be filled with structure and purpose. But at 47, Arthur knew that was a lie. Darkness was not an absence. It was a presence, a substance. It had been building for years, this quiet dread. A heightened awareness at sunset, a reluctance to be the last one in the office, a preference for restaurants that were brightly lit. He chalked it up to a natural, mature caution. But 5 years ago, on a camping trip with his then-wife Sarah, it had solidified. It was the utter, consummate blackness of a forest with no moon, a blackness that felt like a physical weight on his eyeballs. The cheerful crackle of their campfire only seemed to highlight the oppressive silence beyond its meager ring of light. Every rustle in the undergrowth was a predator, every hoot of an owl a warning. He'd spent the night rigid in the tent, heart jackhammering, while Sarah slept soundly beside him. The next morning, bleary-eyed and ashamed, he'd made an excuse about a bad back, and they had packed up and left. Sarah had been understanding, but a fissure had appeared in their marriage, one he couldn't see but could feel, deep and structural. She called it an aversion to adventure. He knew it was a fundamental flaw in his own design. Now, living alone in the sleek, minimalist apartment he'd once designed for the two of them, the flaw had become the central feature of his existence. His home, a testament to open-plan living and floor-to-ceiling windows, became a terrifying void after nightfall. The very openness he'd championed felt like an exposed plain, offering no cover from the things that waited in the dark. His nightly routine was a meticulous, silent ritual, a ceremony of defense against the impending siege. As the sun began to bleed orange and purple over the city skyline, Arthur's internal clock would sound a silent alarm. Phase 1 began, the illumination. He moved from room to room, not just turning on lights, but activating a layered defense system. The main overhead lights in the living room and kitchen were the first line of defense, bright, clinical, banishing all but the most stubborn shadows. Then came the secondary lighting, the articulated desk lamp in his study, the under-cabinet LED strips in the kitchen that lit the countertops like a landing strip, the discreet spotlights in the hallway. Finally, there were the sentinels, the digital clock on the microwave, the power strip LEDs, the standby light on the television, a constellation of tiny, unwavering red and green eyes. He'd then draw the heavy blackout curtains across the vast windows. The city lights, which once thrilled him, were now a taunt, a reminder of the world outside his control. He needed to contain his domain, to make it a sealed, illuminated box. Phase 2 was the perimeter check. This was a holdover from the camping trip, a compulsive scanning for threats. He'd check the lock on the front door twice, sometimes 3 times. He'd open his wardrobe, pushing aside his perfectly arranged suits to confirm the empty space behind them. The worst part was checking under his platform bed. He'd have to get on his hands and knees, his heart already beginning to accelerate, and peer into the cavernous space, half expecting to see a pair of eyes staring back. He never did, but the relief was always temporary, washed away by the shame of the act itself. Only after these rituals were complete could he attempt to live his evening. He'd read a book on the sofa, the light from the standing lamp casting a sharp, safe pool around him. He watched television, but never anything suspenseful. The sound was a shield, but the wrong kind of sound could become a weapon. The final challenge was the journey to the bedroom. He turned off the living room lights and walked, never run, down the short, terrifyingly dark hallway, his hand slapping the wall to find the switch, flooding the passage with light before the darkness could register. The bedroom was his inner sanctum, and its preparation was the most detailed. A small Himalayan salt lamp glowed with a soft, warm, orange-pink light on his nightstand. A motion-activated nightlight was plugged into the socket by the door. The digital alarm clock's numbers were a bright, unwavering blue. This was his final fortress. Sleep was not a gentle surrender, but a forced capitulation. He would lie there, his mind hyper-aware, listening. The creak of the building settling was the footstep he'd been waiting for. The hum of the refrigerator cycling on was a low growl. His own imagination, the very tool that allowed him to envision soaring structures, became his torturer, populating the shadows with forms and intentions born from a primal part of his brain he couldn't reason with. The event that shattered his carefully constructed world was, on the surface, mundane. A city-wide power outage. A blown transformer, they said later. It happened at 9:37 p.m. on a Tuesday. Arthur was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. One moment, the apartment was a bastion of light and hum. The next, it was swallowed. The blackness was absolute. It was more than the absence of light. It was an erasure. The familiar shapes of his furniture, the outline of the windows, the very dimensions of the rooms, all were devoured by an immense, silent nothing. The city outside, usually a brilliant tapestry, was gone. The outage was widespread. His breath caught in his throat. For a full 10 seconds, he was paralyzed, his mind a screaming blank. Then the fear arrived, not as a wave, but as a total immersion. It was cold and heavy, pressing in on him from all sides. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. They're here. The thought was unbidden, visceral. The they had no form, no name, but he knew they were now free to move in this perfect, concealing darkness. He could feel them watching from the corners of the room that no longer existed, creeping from under the bed, their forms flowing like smoke. His heart was a frantic, caged animal beating against his ribs. A cold sweat bloomed on his skin. He stumbled, his hand flailing for the kitchen counter, his knuckles connecting with the hard edge with the sharp pain he barely registered. He was disoriented, lost in his own home. The logical part of his brain, the architect, was screaming at him, "It's a power outage, you fool! The building is the same." But it was a tiny, distant voice in a hurricane of primal terror. He needed light, any light. He remembered his phone charging on his nightstand, in the bedroom, at the end of the dark hallway. The journey felt like a mile. He moved with his back against the wall, his arms outstretched, shuffling his feet so he wouldn't trip. Every rustle of his own clothing was the sound of something else moving. Every beat of his heart was a countdown to an encounter he was sure would break him. The darkness felt like a physical resistance, a viscous fluid slowing him down. He found the doorframe, his fingers digging into the wood. He took a breath, the air shuddering in his lungs, and plunged his hand into the bedroom, sweeping it across the wall for the switch, a useless, automated gesture. He inched forward, towards the nightstand. His hand closed around the cool, hard rectangle of his phone. He fumbled for the power button. The screen blazed to life. The light was shocking, almost painful. It illuminated his own face, pale and wide-eyed, and a small immediate circle around him. He held it up like a torch, sweeping the beam across the room. The jacket slung over his chair was just a jacket. The shadow in the corner was just the shadow of his reading lamp. The they had retreated, but the terror remained, a chemical burn in his system. He sat on the edge of his bed, clutching the phone, its glow the only thing tethering him to reality. He stayed that way for an hour, until the power suddenly returned, with a beep and a hum, flooding the apartment with a light that felt accusing in its normality. The outage lasted 73 minutes. It felt like an eternity, and it changed everything. His rituals were exposed as the flimsy defenses they were. His fortress had been breached without a single brick being displaced. He couldn't live like this anymore. The shame was now secondary to the sheer, exhausting terror. The logical part of Arthur, the part that designed structures to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes, knew that if a foundation was cracked, you didn't just paint over it. You had to shore it up. You had to go back to the blueprint. He found himself searching online, late one night, the salt lamp glowing beside him. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Typing the words felt like a confession. Fear of the dark. Nyctophobia. He clicked. The screen filled with articles, forums, clinical definitions. Reading the symptoms was like reading his own biography. Intense anxiety, panic attacks, shortness of breath, obsessive-compulsive safety behaviors, a racing heart. Seeing it laid out so clinically was both shaming and strangely validating. He wasn't going mad. He had a condition. It had a name. He found a forum. People with usernames like ShadowWalker23 and Afraid of the Moon shared their stories. They talked about nightlights, about sleeping with the TV on, about the dread of bedtime. They were adults, teachers, accountants, parents. Reading their posts, Arthur felt a profound, unexpected sense of connection. He wasn't alone in this silent, shameful war. One post from a user named Starchild mentioned something called graduated exposure therapy and linked to a website for a local therapist, Dr. Alastair Finch, who specialized in anxiety disorders and phobias. Making the call was one of the hardest things Arthur had ever done. His voice was stiff, formal, as he spoke to the receptionist, as if he were scheduling a consultation for a building project. He half hoped there would be no appointments for months, but they had an opening the following Tuesday. Dr. Finch's office was nothing like he'd imagined. It wasn't a sterile, clinical space, but a warm, book-lined room with comfortable chairs and a large window looking out onto a leafy courtyard. Dr. Finch himself was a man in his 60s, with a calm, measured demeanor and eyes that held no judgment. "You're an architect, Mr. Pynchon," Dr. Finch said, after Arthur had haltingly laid out his story, focusing on the inconvenience of his fear. "You understand that to fix a problem, you must first understand its load-bearing points, the structure of your fear. We're not here to demolish you. We're here to conduct a careful renovation." The metaphor landed. Arthur felt his shoulders relax a fraction. "The darkness," Dr. Finch continued, "is a blank canvas. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that handles threat, is a brilliant but paranoid artist. When it has no data, it fills the void with worst-case scenarios. It's trying to protect you, We need to teach it new, safer images to paint. The first assignment was simple, almost laughably so. I want you to sit in your living room during the day with the curtains open. Then I want you to close your eyes for 30 seconds. Close my eyes? Arthur repeated, incredulous. It's a controlled darkness, safe, because you know exactly what's around you. Your logical mind is in charge. We're starting with the foundation, disassociating the sensation of visual deprivation from imminent danger. That evening, Arthur tried it. He sat on his sofa, the late afternoon sun streaming in. He closed his eyes. For the first 10 seconds, it was fine. Then, the old familiar tinge of anxiety began to creep in. His mind started to whisper, what if something has changed? What if, while your eyes were closed, something came in? He fought the urge to open them, counting slowly in his head. When he reached 30, he opened his eyes. The room was exactly as he had left it. He felt a small but significant victory. The sessions with Dr. Finch became a weekly pilgrimage. They built a fear ladder. At the bottom were the least frightening scenarios, sitting in a dimly lit room, walking down the lit hallway without turning on the lights. At the top was the ultimate terrifying goal, spending 10 minutes in his windowless walk-in closet in complete darkness. The work was grueling. Each step up the ladder felt like scaling a cliff. Dr. Finch taught him breathing techniques, box breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. It was a way to manually regulate his nervous system, to wrest control from the panicking amygdala. Your breath is the most fundamental rhythm, Dr. Finch said. When your fear screams, you answer with a whisper of air. You remind your body who is in charge. Arthur practiced. He started by turning off one lamp in the living room. He sat in the comparative dimness, his breath hitching, his hands clenched. He'd focus on the breathing. In, 2, 3, 4, hold. The first few times, he lasted only a minute before the urge to flick the switch back on became overwhelming. But he stuck with it. He kept a journal, as Dr. Finch suggested, noting his anxiety level on a scale of 1 to 10. He saw the numbers slowly, incrementally decrease. He graduated to walking from the living room to the kitchen with only the under-cabinet lights on. It felt like crossing a chasm. The shadows in the dining area seemed to pulse. But he did it, and nothing happened. The biggest breakthrough came when he decided to redesign his own space. He was an architect, after all. If his environment was feeding his fear, he could redesign the environment. He didn't need more light. He needed better light. He needed to eliminate the unknown. He went to a high-end lighting store and spent a small fortune on a new, smart lighting system. He installed programmable, dimmable LEDs in every room. He could control them all from his phone. He created scenes. A daytime scene with bright, cool light, an evening scene with warm, soft light, and a new one which he called the gradient. The gradient was his masterpiece. At 9 p.m., the lights would begin an imperceptible, slow dimming over the course of an hour. It wasn't a sudden plunge into darkness, but a gentle, gradual descent, giving his mind and body time to adjust. It mimicked the natural sunset his apartment, with its blackout curtains, had been denied. It wasn't a cheat, he told himself. It was a coping mechanism, a scaffold while he rebuilt the permanent structure. 2 months into his therapy, he stood before his walk-in closet, the final step on his fear ladder. He had his phone in his hand, the timer set for 10 minutes. The smart lighting app was open, his thumb hovering over the off command for the closet light. His heart was already thudding. This was different. This was total windowless darkness, the kind of darkness that had consumed him during the blackout. You are an architect, he told himself. You know this space. You know its dimensions. You know it contains 12 suits, 20 shirts, and 3 pairs of dress shoes. There is no data to support the existence of anything else. He took a deep box breath, and he tapped the screen. The darkness was immediate and absolute. It was like being buried alive. The air felt still and dead. His panic surged, a wild animal trying to claw its way out of his chest. His breath hitched. In, 2, 3, 4. He could hear the blood roaring in his ears. Hold. 2, 3, 4. A part of his mind was screaming, "Get out! Out! 2, 3, 4. He forced himself to reach out a hand. He felt the familiar texture of his wool overcoat. It was just a coat. He was in his closet. Hold. 2, 3, 4. The minutes stretched like taffy. He focused on his senses, the smell of cedar and faint laundry detergent, the feel of the carpet under his feet, the sound of his own gradually steadying breath. He wasn't just waiting for the time to pass. He was actively being in the darkness. He was collecting data. The data was, I am safe. His mind, deprived of visual input, began to do something unexpected. It started to visualize the space, not with monsters, but with lines. He could see, in his mind's eye, the clean lines of the shelves, the hanging rod, the door frame. He was mentally reconstructing the blueprint of the closet. It was an act of creation, not fear. When the timer on his phone finally chimed, the sound was almost a surprise. He didn't scramble for the light. He finished his breathing cycle. Then he slowly reached out and tapped the on command on his phone. The light was blinding, but as his eyes adjusted, he looked around. It was just his closet, exactly as he had known it would be. He hadn't just survived the 10 minutes. He had, for a few moments, mastered them. He walked out of the closet, his legs shaky, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. He had faced the heart of his fear and had come out the other side. The monster had no teeth. It was just a room without light. Arthur didn't become a man who loved the dark. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to live without being terrorized by it. He still used his gradient lighting scene. He still preferred a well-lit room, but the rituals were gone. He no longer checked under the bed. He could get up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night without his heart trying to escape his chest. The walk down the hallway was just a walk down a hallway. One evening, about 6 months after he first walked into Dr. Finch's office, there was another, shorter power outage. It lasted only 5 minutes. Arthur was in the kitchen. The darkness fell, and for a moment the old fear stirred, a ghost of a habit. But it didn't take hold. He felt his breath deepen automatically. In, 2, 3, 4. He stood still, knowing his environment. He waited. When the power returned, he simply continued making his tea. The victory was in its ordinariness. He started a new project, a personal one. He began designing a series of small, beautiful public night gardens, spaces meant to be enjoyed after sunset. He designed them with carefully considered lighting, gentle path lights, subtle uplighting in trees, soft glowing orbs. He used textures and scents, lavender, jasmine, that came alive in the cool night air. He was using his skill not to barricade himself against the night, but to create a gentle, welcoming relationship with it. He was learning that the darkness wasn't something to be defeated. It was a different way of seeing, a different way of being. It was a space for quiet and reflection, for the scent of night-blooming flowers and the quiet rustle of leaves. It had its own architecture, one not of stark, defiant light, but of soft contours and deep, peaceful shadows. Arthur Pynchon, the man who feared the dark, was slowly learning to draw its blueprint. And in doing so, he was finally redesigning himself. The fear was still a part of the structure, a load-bearing wall that remembered a past weakness, but it no longer defined the entire building. The rest of the space was now open for living.